Okay, so we're gonna make sure everybody's on the same page for this exam. And just to be clear, this exam is respiratory, renal, and acid-base balance. And those three things tied together. Didn't work the way it was. Alright. So, respiratory stuff I'm pretty good with. Renal stuff, go over the renal stuff, and there's another review thing here that covers renal stuff and electrolyte stuff, in terms of like electrolytes that are important, acid-base balance too. This is though is we're going to spend a little time with this renal and acid-base stuff. So what I'm concerned with is the big picture idea of the kidneys, not the minutia of the kidneys, the big picture idea of the kidneys and how they filter the blood. Something to keep in mind is the kidneys filter the entire volume of your blood 60 times a day. And of that, what becomes urine is less than 1% of that. If you peed out everything the kidneys filtered out, you'd pee out the entire volume of plasma in under an hour. That's how much they're doing. They're very proactive. They're doing lots of stuff all the time. So there's some processes going on in the kidneys that you need to be aware of. Obviously, the first one is filtration, and then reabsorption, and some secretion. Now, one thing that I want you to know is what's going on in the nephron. If you've looked at the other review / the PowerPoint presentation, the nephron is the working part of the kidney. It's the unit of the kidney. And it's divided into different parts. We have the glomerulus, and then we have the tubule system after that. And so we have the proximal convoluted tubule, what's called the loop of Henle. Oh, that didn't look right at all. And then the distal convoluted tubule. After that, what's left is called the collecting. Now, if you go back and you look in that PowerPoint presentation, you'll see the big picture ideas here, and that is what happens in each of those sections. In the glomerulus, we have filtration. In the proximal convoluted tubule, we get bulk reabsorption. In the loop of Henle, we get concentration. Distal convoluted tubule, collecting duct, fine tuning. There we go. The analogy that I use for this is the show Hoarders. If you've ever seen Hoarders, it's a disturbing show. It makes you feel better about yourself, about people who don't throw anything away. Not only do they not throw anything away, like they proactively keep trash / dead things, urine, feces, whatever. Like they're hoarding, right? So your kidneys work in a similar fashion as this show. So in the show, you have someone who's hoarding, who's keeping all this junk, and they hire someone to come in and help them get rid of it. This is the role of your kidneys. And if you watch the show, the first thing they do is they take everything and they move it out. Everything they can move out, they move out. This is the first part of this process. It's filtration. Now, if you watch the show, like, they move everything out they can, but there's some stuff they can't move out, like big appliances, actual, like, parts of the house or whatever, stuff that's too big to go through the door, like the grand piano that the dude didn't even know they had. All of that crap stays inside the house. It's too big to go through the door, or it's too big to move. The same thing's going to happen at the kidneys. During this process of filtration, everything we can push out, we push out. What it's had to go through is what's called the filtration membrane. Now, the filtration membrane consists of the capillary wall. Now, here at the kidneys, this is a fenestrated capillary. It's got a bunch of tiny holes in it. And then it consists of something called a podocyte wrapped around that capillary, and then their fused membranes. What we get is this. So we have the wall of the capillary, which, as I mentioned, is fenestrated. It's got holes in it. Holes. And then we have on this side these things called podocyte. And podocyte means foot cell. And they wrap around this capillary. And again, expertly drawn. I really miss my calling as an artist. Brilliant. And then their fused membrane right here. Now, so over here we got blood. And over here we have what's called the capsular space. So now we want to get stuff out of the blood into this capsular space. We go through this. This is called the filtration membrane, like I said. And what can go through there? Most everything. This is going to prevent the movement of, obviously, blood cells. So cells have to stay here. They're too big to go through. Big plasma proteins. Man, that looks terrible. Macromolecules, like big proteins, negatively charged anions, big stuff that can't go through. Everything else goes here. So this is mostly plasma, and it's a lot of stuff that you wanted, actually. And often they find this in the hoarder show, too, is they start moving stuff out, and they're like, oh, you've got this $1 million baseball card collection that was buried under dead cats or whatever you didn't even know was there. So we shove everything out, and now you've got this stuff in the capsule space. At this point, this is called filtrate. It is not urine yet, but it's going to accumulate in this little capsule that's wrapped around this. If you look at your slideshow, it's called Bowman's capsule or glomerular capsule. And then it's going to enter the next part of this, which is called the proximal convoluted tubule. Now, the proximal convoluted tubule, PCT, is for bulk reabsorption. Here, nearly everything that you've shoved out, you're going to get back. In the proximal convoluted tubule, you're going to reabsorb 5% of the water and the electrolytes that you shoved out. Better. And all organic nutrient. You have that stuff that you wanted. You should have glucose. We need that. We're going to have to get it back. So the cells in the proximal convoluted tubule are specialized for reabsorption, which means they're going to have microvilli, that's a lot of surface area, and they're going to have lots of mitochondria. That's ATP for active transport. They're going to use energy to pump this junk back into your blood. Now, there's an important concept here at the proximal convoluted tubule called the transport maximum. Transport maximum is the most of any substance that you can pump back in the blood. And there is a maximum to that because we're dealing with cells and we're moving stuff back in the blood through membrane proteins. So if we have our cells here, and let's say blood is over here, filtrate is here. Drop more cells. To get back in the blood, you've got to go through this cell. And in this cell membrane, you're going to have some membrane proteins. And let's say in this case, these membrane proteins are active transport for glucose. They're going to move glucose in here and out here so that we get glucose back in the blood. With my stupid illustration here, there's only like 4 of these proteins. So if you get more molecules of glucose out here than you have protein, what do you do with them? They're not going to sit there and wait. This is fluid and it's moving through this tube. So what happens to it? It goes. It keeps going. Actually, there's no mechanism to reabsorb any of these organic nutrients past the proximal convoluted tubule. This is the only place you reabsorb organic nutrients. So if you exceed the transport maximum, this ends up in the urine. Now, you have one of the major mechanisms of diabetes. Because in diabetes, one of the major symptoms is glucose in the urine. Why? Because you exceeded the transport maximum. What's another symptom of diabetes? Excessive urination. Increase the amount of urine because that glucose becomes an osmotic diuretic. Can't reabsorb it. It stays behind in that filtrate and it pulls water toward it, causes osmosis. So you produce more urine. And that urine has glucose in it. Your urine should not have glucose in it. Insulin takes care of that junk. You absorb that glucose into the cells. You would be hard pressed to make glucose show up in your urine. Not being a diabetic. Not being a diabetic, it's happening. Proximal convoluted tubule, focus, bulk reabsorption. You're reabsorbing most of the stuff, right? We threw everything out of the house. Now let's get most of that crap back in and just organize and clean because that's what you should have done in the beginning. Now, in the loop of Henle, we're going to concentrate urine. And to do this, we use something called a countercurrent mechanism. I'm not going to get into that detail right now. It's not super useful. What I need you to know about the loop of Henle is that it's really for concentration. We're going to reabsorb most of the water that's left in electrolytes here so that we get more electrolytes back in and more water back in. And past that loop of Henle, then we have the distal convoluted tubule and the collecting duct. And this is fine-tuning. And it is controlled by hormones. What hormones? I'm glad you asked. Aldosterone. Parathyroid hormone. Atrial natriuretic peptide. Antidiuretic hormone. So just like in the show, what you'll find at the end of this is that you might have brought some stuff back in that you didn't need to. Throw that stuff away. Ask yourself, do you really need that? How many gallons of urine is appropriate to keep in your house? 0. Throw that away. And so here we fine-tune that. And one of the major hormones here is aldosterone. And I do need you to remember that aldosterone causes sodium retention and potassium excretion. Sodium and potassium always move the opposite way. So this is controlled by aldosterone. When you retain sodium, you get rid of potassium. Now, when you retain sodium, you also retain water. So this is going to increase blood pressure when you retain water. But you're getting rid of that potassium, and that's important. Parathyroid hormone is, of course, calcium, retaining that calcium. Antidiuretic hormone is retaining water. Atrial natriuretic peptide, you get rid of the sodium, so potassium. But aldosterone is the big hormone here. Sodium retention, potassium excretion. One of the major functions of the kidneys is that. Because without kidney function, that potassium will build up in your system and it will kill you quickly. Potassium imbalances will stop your heart cold. So that's an essential function of the kidneys. All right, another big important idea here is on the side of your blackboard, you'll see something that says arterial blood gas, or ABG practice. The kidneys and the lungs, along with the blood, keep the blood pH in the correct range. Let's talk about this now. Arterial blood gases. The pH of arterial blood, 7.35, 7.45. Remember that low pH is acid, high pH is alkaline. pH of your blood drops to 7, you're dead. pH of blood goes up to like 7.8, you're dead. Not a give and take here. Luckily, your blood is a buffer. In your blood, we have a defense against changes in pH. Now, we're going to talk about these buffers quickly. I'm going to go in order. The first defense is the chemical buffer. This is the buffer in the blood. Now, there's a buffer in the urine and a buffer inside the cells. We might mention that, but chemical buffer in the blood, this is the bicarbonate buffer. It's the fastest, but the least powerful. The bicarbonate buffer is now to now, like it's moment to moment change. It's balancing pH of your blood right now. But if something goes wrong and you exceed the amount of bicarbonate that you can use to buffer this, well then we have the next one in line, the respiratory buffer. The respiratory buffer, a little more powerful, a little slower. Now, the way this works, carbon dioxide and water give you carbonic acid, which immediately falls apart into a hydrogen proton and bicarbonate. These reactions are reversible. Now, okay, here's the trick. When you see that, you need to equate that with it. Because if you add more carbon dioxide, the reaction will proceed this way. And that's the definition of an acid, that hydrogen proton. So the more carbon dioxide you have in your blood, the more acidic it is. Now this gives us an opportunity to buffer, because the opposite is also true. The less carbon dioxide you have in your blood, the less acidic it is. For example, when you have someone who is in acidosis, like diabetic ketoacidosis, will be breathing very quickly. They'll be hyperventilating. They'll be blowing off carbon dioxide very quickly to lower the amount of carbon dioxide in your blood. Because if you lower the CO2 in your blood, the blood becomes more alkaline and it balances out that acidity. Our last buffer is the renal buffer. Renal buffer is the slowest but the most powerful. It is the only one of these that actually eliminates hydrogen proton and generates bicarbonate. Here's the thing, is that we're always really correcting for the acidic condition. The acidic condition is what happens. Your metabolism produces carbon dioxide, which makes that reaction occur that creates that carbonic acid. We're always correcting for that. The alkaline condition is much less common. Now, we're going to work through some arterial blood gas things, and these are things that you won't get for a patient. You'll get arterial blood gas. What you'll get on there is the patient's pH, we'll get the partial pressure of carbon dioxide, and you will get the concentration of bicarbonate. Now, you'll also get oxygen and other stuff, but these are the three that we care about. Now, normal pH between 7.35 and 7.45. Partial pressure of carbon dioxide between 35 and 45 millimeters of mercury. Concentration of bicarbonate between 22 26 equivalents per liter. Now, if the pH is less than 7.35, acidosis. What's going to happen in acidosis? When hemoglobin doesn't want to stick to oxygen. That's going to suck. Enzymes don't work. That's going to suck. And eventually it's going to kill. If the pH is greater than 7.45, that's alkalosis. Hemoglobin won't let go of oxygen. Enzymes won't work, and it's going to kill. All right. Now, let's look at our other values. If the partial pressure is greater than 45 millimeters of mercury, remember that carbon dioxide is the acid. That is the acidic part of this. And if the partial pressure of carbon dioxide is less than 35 millimeters of mercury, alcohol. Now, how can you change the values of carbon dioxide in your blood right now? Okay, hold your breath. If you hold your breath, what builds up in your blood? Carbon dioxide. And that carbon dioxide building up in your blood is why you have to breathe again. Remember, we talked about this. You don't run out of oxygen. Carbon dioxide builds up in your blood, and it makes the blood more acidic, and that triggers the respiratory center, and it makes you breathe. So hypoventilation, not breathing, causes the blood to be more acidic. The opposite is that, how can you make your blood more alkaline right now? Hyperventilate. If you hyperventilate, you blow off carbon dioxide too much. You get rid of all that carbon dioxide, and you make the blood more alkaline. Now, let's look at the renal thing. If the concentration of carbonate is greater than 26 milliequivalents per liter. Bicarbonate's alkaline. This is the alkaline side of this. And if the concentration of bicarbonate is less than 22 milliequivalents per liter, acidic side of this. Now, what would cause this? Metabolic issues would cause this. This means that you're using up that bicarbonate in the blood. You're exceeding the kidney's ability to fix this right. This would happen in diabetic ketoacidosis. This might happen in renal failure. Now, alkalosis in this case is much less common. It's something that would happen severe eating disorder where you're bulimia, like you're constantly throwing up, or you overdose on antacid. That might cause alkalosis in this case. But the acidic thing is much more common. So now let's look at some actual patient numbers and work through some of these problems. So, sorry. Your first patient, pH 7.25, arterial blood. Partial pressure of carbon dioxide is 50 millimeters of mercury. Your concentration of bicarbonate is it's brilliant. All right. So when you work through these problems, you have to ask yourself questions. The first questions that you need to ask yourself is acidosis or alkalosis. And that comes from pH. So in this case, the pH is less than 7.35, and that makes it acidosis. The next question that you have to ask yourself is it respiratory or metabolic? What we're asking here is what is causing this problem? Is it something the patient's doing breathing differently, something wrong with the respiration, or is it something wrong with their metabolism, wrong with their kidneys, or hormonal, something that's screwed up in the metabolism? What's causing this? Now, in this case, right, the respiratory, you're looking at the carbon dioxide value. Metabolic, you're looking at the bicarbonate value. So now you look at these values. Okay, so let's look at them individually. First, let's look at the partial pressure of carbon dioxide. It's 50. Now, if we scroll back up, if the partial pressure of carbon dioxide is higher than 45, that's acidic. So now let's go back down. We'll make a note of that. So that's acidic. Bicarbonate between 22 and 24, well, this is right in the middle. So that's normal. Now, our big picture diagnosis is acidosis. Which of these two values causes acidosis? Carbon dioxide does. So that means that it is respiratory. So this condition is respiratory acidosis. Because the carbon dioxide value is acidic and your pH is acidic. The last question that you ask yourself is it compensated? What you'll see is if these conditions persist, one system will try to fix the other. It will try to compensate for it. Just like the diabetic who's in acidosis who's breathing really fast, that's the respiratory system trying to compensate for a metabolic issue. We'll look at that in a minute. So this condition is respiratory acidosis. So a question to ask yourself is, how is this patient breathing if it's respiratory in origin? Respiratory acidosis is hypoventilation. This patient isn't breathing enough, or they're not breathing at all. Respiratory alkalosis is hyperventilation. It's breathing too fast, getting rid of more carbon dioxide than they need. All right, let's look at another set of values. I'm just going to scroll back up here and no, let's not. All right, so now let's do this. So your pH here, your next patient, let's say 7.6. But actually, really, your partial pressure of carbon dioxide is 40, and your concentration of bicarbonate. I'm going to change my values there. And 50. Concentration of bicarbonate is 10. All right, so again, let's ask ourselves the questions. First one, is it acidosis or alkalosis? Well, the pH is higher than 7.45. If it's higher than 7.45, that makes it alkalosis. Our big picture diagnosis, this patient is in alkalosis. Now, the next question that you have to ask yourself, is it respiratory or metabolic? So let's look at our values. Let's start at the bicarbonate end of this. The bicarbonate here is too low. It's less than 22. That's acidic. Okay, now let's look at the carbon dioxide. It's only 15. That's alkaline because it's. So now, which of these two values, the carbon dioxide or the bicarbonate, causes alkalosis? Carbon dioxide. So this is respiratory alkalosis. Why then is this value off? That is compensation. Compensated. When one of the values is the opposite of the other, when you have one of these that's alkaline and one of these that's acidic, that's what compensation is. Here, the kidneys are trying to fix this hyperventilation issue. Let's try another. All right, so here we have a patient with a pH 7.2. Partial pressure of carbon dioxide is like 15. And your concentration of bicarbonate is like 5. Now here, is it acidosis or alkalosis? pH is too low. What's acidosis? Now we have to find what's causing that. Is it the carbon dioxide or the bicarbonate? Well, the carbon dioxide is low. And if carbon dioxide is low, that's alkalosis. So that's alkaline. The bicarbonate's low, and that's acidic. So, which of these is causing it? The bicarbonate's causing it. So this is metabolic acidosis. The third question, is it compensated for? Yes, because the carbon dioxide is the opposite. The carbon dioxide is alkaline, while the bicarbonate is acidic. Compensated metabolic acidosis. This patient is breathing too fast to compensate for the acidosis. Would be what you would see in like diabetic ketoacidosis. There are those arterial blood gas practice problems on the side. There's not an abundance of this on your exam, but you do need to know how to do this because it is important. Now, if I remember correctly, this exam is short. I'll get this exam up, and then shortly thereafter, I'll get your lab structures up. Your lab structures, right? Respiratory structures, um, renal structures, um, kidney things. If I don't have that up, I'll set up. Uh, Your like the average on your lab exam was like or something. I'm not overly concerned with that. Um, it's just one of those things that we're gonna have to go with because there's no way I can adequately get that information to you and then test you over it in such a manner that you really, really get those structures learned. We're working on it, like as a college. Um, Electrolyte balance. I believe in this other thing. I'll go over that electrolyte thing. Um, and fluid balance as well. So I think I go over the idea of dehydration, hypotonic hydration. I'm not worried about the minutia of the kidneys, like I said. Know what the different parts of the nephron do. Transport maximum, big picture idea of what the kidneys are doing. Don't get lost in things like juxtaglomerular apparatus and countercurrent flow and that sort of thing. All right. I'm going to go ahead and get this exam posted shortly rather than later and give you a little bit extra time on it and time to ask questions. I will set it so that you have more time to do it, so that you have the ability to ask me questions if you need to. And by all means, drop me an email. Like if there's something you're like, what is that nonsense? Drop me an email and we can work that out. Um, so again, slideshows you should be looking at on Blackboard. Respiratory, renal, acid base, electrolyte, fluid balance. And you'll be, thus far, everybody's doing well. I'm pleased with the progress we've made. For the most part, I'm pleased with your grades. There are some exceptions. You know who you are. But for the most part, I'm hoping that it's going well. If you have issues, or if you're sick and you need time, or you need some sort of extension or whatever, let me know. We're making all sorts of exceptions for people that are COVID positive, so that you have the time you need to both complete the course and recover. So yeah, don't hesitate to let me know if something's going on like that, so that we know. And if you're wondering if all of this was worth it in terms of having class online and the trouble that it's been, the answer to that is yes. At the end of the spring, I had 2 students in spring semester that ended up testing positive, one of them at one of the nursing homes where we had several deaths and outbreak. And this semester, I've had several students positive or not asymptomatic. They are sick. And just from a historical point of view, I know how this goes down. Because several years ago, I had a girl show up to class in the summer with tuberculosis, coughing her lungs up, literally. And I got an email from the dean of students telling me, by the way, you had a student in class with active tuberculosis, and all the class needs to go get tested to make sure. Now, luckily, none of us tested positive for tuberculosis, but it could have gone much worse because she did come to class and she was coughing like crazy, and I don't know how none of us got it. This particular virus is much more contagious than that, and because you are capable of spreading it before you have symptoms, we would have had a mini outbreak there in class with people coming before they had symptoms. It could have been much worse. But yes, this has been worth it. We've saved several of us, or this class in particular, from infection, just based on the numbers of people who emailed me telling me, I'm positive now, and I'm sick. And that doesn't even count the people who are probably asymptomatic and don't even know it. Several people have asked me what the fall is going to look like. And the answer to that is, for the fall, we're going to be as flexible as possible. We're going to try to keep our distance. So you can look for your classes in the fall. We'll see many, many more online classes being offered. And for those classes that are not fully online, at the very least, they will be in what's being called a flex format. So that at least part of the class is delivered in an online form. And you might have some face-to-face meetings, but that will be a minimum. Instructors are being left with the option to do what they want to. Personally, they're getting me new equipment, and I'm going to go as close to fully online as I possibly can, just for everyone's safety. It doesn't look like it's getting any better in Lubbock, and I'd rather be safe than sorry. If we have any face-to-face meetings, it would be lab meetings. Of course, this doesn't concern you, but you're in here now. But just in case you're taking classes in the fall, this is what you can expect. All right. There's another review. There's like a respiratory review. Look at the reviews, reference those, and again, email me if you have questions during the exam, and I'll go ahead and get that posted in just a bit.